Alright, this is an introduction to 14.2, and now that you have done 14.3, you really understand the pieces of sine and cosine graphs. So now we're just going to take those pieces and shift them, which actually is not too challenging. So we're going to take everything you know about these equations, these sine and cosine graphs, but we're going to shift them. So you're still going to have an A in front of your sine and cosine, and that's still going to be your amplitude. Okay, so that does not change. The B that's in front of the X, whether it's inside the parenthesis or outside the parenthesis, does not matter. That's still going to help you calculate your period. But then, of course, you notice the H and the K. So you're going to have horizontal and vertical shifts. So K is your vertical shift. H is your horizontal shift, and you should be very familiar with that. And the third new piece is going to be a reflected sine or cosine graph. So if you have a negative sine or a negative cosine, it's going to reflect about the x-axis. So basically, if you had a sine wave that looked like this, you're going to take all those points and you're going to reflect them over the x-axis. So if this were my x-axis, this point can't reflect, obviously, but this point will reflect down here, this point will reflect up here, and it's just going to do that. So basically what you're going to be doing is you're going to be taking these simple graphs from 14.1 and then you're going to shift them using the rules above. So if I take this graph and plot some points and then I toss in an H and a K, I might take my points and shift them to the right 2 and down 5 or something like that. But good news is amplitude and period calculations don't change. I do want you to understand, however, that they might be written differently depending. These two equations are the same, so I want you to be able to see this because they don't at first glance look that way. So first and foremost, you have 1 here. You're adding 1 to the sine graph, and here you're adding 1. So it came first, it came last, but still a positive 1 either way. And that would be my vertical shift. So my vertical shift is up 1 unit. Okay. Then look in the parentheses, okay, here, well actually, look at the first one. Inside the parentheses you have x minus pi over 4. Okay, so you know that your h is pi over 4. So you're going to be shifting horizontally to the right pi over 4. Okay, now look at this one, and you would think, well, I'm going to shift to the right pi over 2, but notice the x coefficient has a 2 in front of it. Up here, it had a 1 in front of it. The 2 was out front. The 2 was out front here, but inside the parenthesis here. So basically, whatever's inside this parenthesis, you take that quantity and you set it equal to 0. Well, that gives me pi over 4. But here, if I set that equal to 0, I get pi over 2, and then I have to divide by 2, and I get pi over 4. So I'm still going to get this horizontal shift to the right pi over 4. So do be careful with if the B is 2, right? So my period is going to be 2 pi divided by 2, which is pi, and the B is 2 here and it's 2 here. So it doesn't matter if it's distributed or not. This is easier to me because the B stands out. You don't have to do so much work solving for the horizontal shift, but that's not to say that this won't happen. And then, of course, the amplitude is the number in front of sine, so I have a 1, actually a negative 1 in front of sine, but that's my amplitude. And last but not least, I didn't ask about it, but it is also going to be a reflected sine graph because it's a negative sign, so if I'm subtracting or if there's just a negative in front of it, that tells you you have a reflected sine graph. Alright, so take a second maybe and pause the video and see if you can come up with the horizontal shifts, the vertical shift, and is it reflected? So see if you can answer those and I'll go through them. So in the first one, you're not adding or subtracting anything to this function, so there is no vertical shift. Okay, so there's no vertical shift. I have a parenthesis, so I'm going to take that 2x plus 1, and I'm going to set it equal to 0 to get my horizontal shift. So I'll subtract 1 and divide by 2. So x equals, well, actually I won't write it that way. So my horizontal shift will be to the left, since it's going to be negative, to the left 1/2 of a unit. Notice there's no pi in there, which doesn't happen a lot, but it does, and that's fine. So then your x-axis would be in terms of numbers not in terms of pi. So again, solve the parentheses to get this. And last but not least, is it reflected? Well, look at the cosine. Is it negative? Yes, it is. It's a negative 1/2 times the cosine, so yes, it is reflected. All right, the second one, you have a +1, so you're going to have a vertical shift of up 1. That's that piece. All right, the horizontal shift, of course, if you take the stuff in parentheses and set that equal to 0, so x minus pi halves equals 0, that's pretty easy. You'll just add pi halves. So it's going to shift to the right, pi halves. And then notice that the number in front of sine is -2, so it will be reflected. And the last one, you have a +1, so you're going to have a vertical shift, again, up 1. And there's no parentheses whatsoever, so you have no horizontal shift. And the number in front of the cosine is positive, so you are not reflected. And that's that.